Welcome to another Going Green podcast. We're going to have a look today at what's been hitting the news, and that is the Climate Change 2021, the physical science basis. And because I'm a slow reader and I haven't managed to read all 1,800 pages, we've only had a look at the policymakers one, which is just sort of some sort of 41 pages of stuff. And whereas Paul's got the paper written version, we've also got it in electronic format as well, which is slightly easier to maintain and move around. So we're going to have a quick look at this to see what's sort of worrying everybody and why they're all going to sort of pieces on it, really.
Yeah, it's why it's sort of they're I wouldn't say panicking, but it's why they're going. It's a stark warning. It's a we shall we say we're doomed.
You're going to look up that Fraser one, weren't you? Yes.
Yeah, well,
doesn't matter. Right. So the current state of the climate says.
Well,
I was expecting you to say we're doomed, but yeah.
Well, you might think, we're all the problems and sort of, the world's on fire and it's all doom and gloom.
Or flooded.
Or flooded.
So we do have the or flooded or basically.
Yeah.
It's either on fire or flooded. And in some countries like China, it's flooded and on fire. Turkey's flooded and on fire. It just depends where you draw the little line. And the weather's not seeming to draw the little line, the putting flood where the fire was to sort of put it out.
No, it's not. And that's daftly because, of course, it's two different regions. It's two different environments. So, yeah.
And it's weather rather than climate. And there is subtle difference between weather and climate. Weather's what we're getting at the moment, and we're having a lot of weather here at the moment. It's still raining here. It was last week, and it probably still will be next week. But it's climate, which is the long-term global sort of things that are happening.
Yeah, it's say the frequency of the storms as opposed to what the actual storm itself.
Yeah. And it's the new bit of wording that's come out. It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere. There's no argument about it. Humans have caused us to get here. We've warmed the atmosphere. We've warmed the ocean. We've warmed the land. And we're seeing now, as a result of what we've done, not in 2050, but now we're seeing widespread and changes in the atmosphere, in the ocean, and I suppose in generally, I would call it the biosphere. Everywhere where we're living, we are seeing vast changes, and these are going to have big impacts on life.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where all the information given off is of course everything is human induced. They've seen things of sort of they've looked at how much volcanoes added CO2 and all those extra bits, and there is a little bit put in by those natural disasters. So it's not just that, but it's sort of like if a volcano puts 1 ton in, we put 15 tons of CO2 in. So yes, they've added a ton in, but we've added so much more than what's needed or what should happen. So it's the knowledge that this is human caused, this is human induced, as the report likes to say. And unfortunately, we've changed the balance of how things work. We're moving things along. Storms are getting worse, floods are getting worse, store fires are getting worse. And
more often.
And the critical thing is more often is the major part. They were saying that a once in a lifetime flood is now happening not every couple of months, but feels like it, but no, it's every couple of years, you see. And that means the problem is we cannot deal with these things fast enough. Where you build it, how long does it take to build flood defenses? Well, unfortunately, you've now got a 6 months turnaround you have to do these things on, as in you've got to clear up the flood water from where it's previously, and then build the flood defense and wait for it to flood again. So it's a whole,
and it's money. One of the big problems is it's money. So you can do things quickly, but it costs more to do that, and therein lies a problem, because we've also everyone's just coming out of the sort of COVID pandemic, or in fact, some people aren't coming out of the COVID pandemic. They're still getting worse. And that has severe economic problems. And those severe economic problems relate to the fact, well, we haven't got money for flood defences. We haven't got money to buy flying fire engines. I do like some of those. When we were out in Croatia, we saw, we had a little fire where we were. It wasn't serious. It was just on the only road out. And we were on a sort of a peninsula. And we had these aircraft sort of landing in the sea and then dive bombing the fire and putting it out.
Yeah.
And we had that sort of really dark red color of the olive groves on fire. And looking at the TV, we've seen those bright colors in Turkey and Greece and Italy of the same olive groves sort of burning that sort of real sort of bright red color.
It's one of those things where I expect this year's olive harvest to be very small, and that the olive oil prices to go up because of all this, which is another economic shock of all of this. You see, no one's predicting it now, but olive oil will now go up as a result of all these fires in the olive oil growing areas.
Yeah.
So, forewarning, if you do want to panic buy olive oil.
Yeah. And in my case, if I buy some olive oil, it'll last me a year. So by that time, it'll sort of be better. Right. So we're looking at the human cause of this global warming to be, at the moment, they say we've gone up about 1.3 centigrade or Celsius, and our contribution is 1.07 Celsius. And that's not much left for sort of nature to go up on.
No. Well, this is what I was talking about, the volcanoes and things, everything, all the natural disasters, how much CO2 is being produced by the forest fires, which is a different thing. But obviously, the hotter it gets, the more likely a forest fire is, or, wildfire is. And that releases even more CO2. And we haven't even done anything at that point, if that makes sense.
And I'm looking here and we're saying, well, Europe's burning, that they've got a heat wave. We had Sicily with 48.8 Celsius. That was sort of quite nice, really, quite comfortable. I wouldn't have minded that.
I think it was record breaking, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it was. And if we're looking at that sort of thing, what's causing us to be also not such good weather? And some of that is in fact due to the Greenland glacier melt, and all that very cold water then enters the sea, basically sort of where this North Atlantic drift is.
Oh,
the Gulf Stream.
The current thing, yeah.
And that seems to be sort of slowing that down and sort of maybe stopping that. And that's got even bigger ramifications.
Well, yeah, if that stops, and of course, then the whole, I wouldn't say water circulation fails,
yeah,
but weather.
And we're starting to hit these tipping points that are in here. We're saying that, here that we are very likely to have caused this, and therein lies the problem, that we're virtually certain that. And that's how this report reads all the way through, that, yep, it's our fault. And this seems to have started already. The sea level has risen already. And we can see that by reports of Bangladesh, of the Maldives, Antigua, Barbuda. They're all sort of They're complaining that they might go extinct.
Or, well, I think you mean the island vanishes.
Well, they use the word extinct, but yeah. I think that people who live there have to start thinking about a different occupation, like sort of fishing,
Yeah.
because they're going to be not living on land, but they're going to be living sort of at sea, and things are going to have to happen about that. Right, so human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years. We've got records going back, sort of, some of them sort of anecdotal evidence, but we've got evidence from tree rings, we've got evidence from the polar ice caps
And
of what the climate was like, and we can see that it's now changed in an unprecedented way in the last, well, really,
I would say 200 years, but it's not quite.
it
that.
started then, but it's really more the last sort of 20 years where we've seen it really skyrocket.
Yeah. So, and it's sort of all, unfortunately, that's us. You know, what has changed in the last 20 years. But critically, what has also changed in those time is, I wouldn't say not necessarily industry, but things, you know, I say unnatural, natural processes like deforestation.
That's not helped, and of course the wildfires aren't helping
The
either.
wildfires aren't helping over. So, you know, you're losing, basically, you're releasing all this carbon into the atmosphere, and it's overwhelming, which is why that's the increase in CO2 levels. So it's interesting. It's one of those hard things to say. It's sort of, you know, directly we might not be putting CO2 in. You know, we're trying our best, you know, to take the CO2 out of industry, but
are we? There's a lot of talk about this.
well, it's one of those hard things to say. It's sort of like, you know, what's the main byproduct of lots of industry? And the answer is, well, mostly steam, which is water, obviously, which isn't actually too bad.
Yeah, but the steam is also hot, which also, you know, is heating. It's having a detrimental effect.
Yeah, I'm not denying any of those, but it's sort of, you know, the only major thing is you could say, well, obviously, if you're using a heater or a burner to burn something, then obviously that's gonna, you know, you're burning something, whether it be at the power station or whether it be, you know, at the furnace where you are. You know, your burning is the problem. Combustion is the problem, but unfortunately, we can't replace combustion, which is the major impact of what we're having issues with. You know, and it's all these things we have in the relationship of where the industries are going, what's happening, you know, clearing the space is having a very detrimental effect to everything.
Yeah. There's little I can say to that one apart from absolutely agreeing with what you're saying. So the next little bit I've got is the observed warming is driven by emissions from human activities. Yeah, it's our fault. And this greenhouse warming is partially masked by something called aerosol cooling. And being the chemist here, I'm going to get you to tell them what aerosol cooling is.
I remember aerosol cooling. It's one of those things where, back in the 70s, good time to be alive. We were releasing all these.
I was.
All these we putting into gases. We're making everything aerolized and putting what are known as CFCs, which is the
chlorofluorocarbons.
Yeah, chlorofluorocarbons. Anyway, and they were all right. They were not too bad. Got in the atmosphere, and that's what led to the destruction of the ozone layer, which is the hole over Antarctica and Australia. Fast forward, 20 years into the 1990s?
Yeah.
Something like that. We banned it because, of course, there's now a hole in the ozone layer. So, you know, we stopped it. So that works, and slowly the ozone layer has repaired, because obviously it depletes and then replenishes as the season goes, because that's how it works.
And the CFCs get used up, don't
And
they? They
CFCs
disappear.
Yeah, and they disappear, which is all good. So anyway, so come along, and we're going sort of now. It's sort of, well, we're using other aerosols.
Often compressed air now, isn't it?
Often compressed air was no problem. That's fairly ambiguous. You know, you take compressed air, you uncompress it in the atmosphere. Have you changed the thing? No. But a little bit you have. Because obviously it's all you put together, and occasionally things come out when you compress them as not as what they came in as, which is a whole different chemistry story. But effectively, you know, we're talking about those things being released and those things also causing the problems. But it's additionally other things, like, when did the catalytic converter come in? You know, the cars were spitting out all sorts of other chemicals, because they took air and they basically combusted in heat. Air turns into all these products with, like,
sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide.
But it's not necessarily nitrogen dioxide. It's any of the nitrogen oxides. You know, you're talking,
And some are much nastier than others, aren't they?
yeah. And so lots of things. There was a way of sort of catalytic converter. Everything comes out, and it comes out as CO2 and water, and that seemed as great, because of course, you know, at the time CO2 wasn't bad, but we weren't creating all these nitrogen oxides, which do and have caused a lot of.
So we're getting rid of those, but the other major thing that's still causing problems there is methane. And there's been a big talk about, could we actually do something about the methane?
Yeah, well,
Cow fart, for lack of a better term, or let's be honest, sheep.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's just,
or as my friend would call it, sheeps.
Yeah,
and he is a farmer.
Yeah,
we apologise for the digging up of the road. They're deciding to do it. They only do digging up of the road, cutting down trees on a Thursday afternoon.
On a Thursday afternoon when we're recording. Yeah, just simple. Anyway, yeah. So there's a whole problem of these of methane in the atmosphere, but
it's a quick fix. That's all we can do with some of that, because some of the methane gets caused by the process of petrol, and if they're going to get rid of petrol, that's good, and that will get rid of the methane. But I can see one big problem here, and if we're starting to get rid of petrol, and trying to get people onto electric, all well and good, but governments tend to raise their money with petrol tax.
Yeah, I was interested in hearing about this. With the move to electric vehicles and all sorts of electric devices, right? The government won't be able to have fuel duty, because obviously we won't have petrol and they can't tax the petrol. So suddenly they've got to manage to work out, how do they take the fuel duty for the electricity?
And they don't want to tax people going into electric cars at the moment, because they're expensive enough, and they don't want to try and make it even more expensive. And we've been seeing governments talking about, well, we need to go to various things to counteract this report. And one of those things that we can do is hike up fuel prices and make everyone go over there. But we don't want to sort of upset inflation. And so governments, I think, have got a hard time here at the moment.
Yeah, it's, you know, do you tax them to pay for the conversion to cleaner fuels and things? But then, of course, you've got the economic impact of that of those problems, you know, such as the VAT. But also, suddenly you've lost money to do other projects. You've lost money to do if you cut fuel tax because you're converting everybody across, then people are moving. Then you have less money to actually pay on these subsidies to help make cars cheaper. So it's the whole balancing act. You know, I know the UK government, you hear the sort of the Treasury's having a right old, I wouldn't say hissy fit, but it's complaining the fact that there isn't enough money, and they're worried about inflation and all these things, you know, and they can't do much to do with climate change because they've got all these problems. But you've got to understand, the Treasury just deals in money. That's his one and only problem. Yeah, it will, if you move and change things, the Treasury has to cope.
One of the things I looked at was climate change is already affecting every inhabited region across the globe, with human influence contributing to many observed changes in weather and climate extremes. And they showed a nice little map. And as they showed this little map, they drew these little sort of hexagons to represent different parts of the world. And they said that, well, let's have 1 dot for low, 2 dots are medium, 3 dots are high, and nearly everybody got 3 dots, apart from Central and Eastern USA, who said, it's nothing to do with us, mate. Yeah, we've got here sort of basically low agreement about any of our types of change, and it's going to be absolutely minimal.
Yeah, and there's the problem, you see. Yes, the world needs to change, and the world is willing, and you might find that when COP comes around in under 80 days, I think, or
Yeah,
that's about right.
from the time we're recording. Yeah.
They're going sort of all these things, but they keep saying, China needs to do more, India needs to do more, and they keep going, well, we'll do more once America does more. And you might say, but America's been doing a lot. Well, they haven't been for the last 5 years. Only in the last year and a bit they've been doing things.
Yeah, they've accepted the fact that they have got some of this, rather than someone sticking his head in the sand saying, it's nothing to do with us. No, I think we'll do more coal. And it's interesting to see how the US has changed. But we're looking at these sort of big countries have really got to get their act together. We're only a little island here, and we're actually doing quite well. Look at the amount of wind turbines, offshore, onshore wind turbines we've got. We're getting up to sort of 40-50% of our electricity being made from renewable sources. And that's good.
Yeah, that's fantastic for here. The problem is you then look at other countries and you do the same analysis of sort of where is their power being generated. And the honest, unfortunate answer is it isn't reaching the 40% which they said and they need to be. They're probably barely even 10%, which is a problem.
Well, the figures here are such that they were saying that the tipping points are going to be reached in the first time. They were saying about 2050. And some countries have then been moving their numbers down a bit, saying, well, we'll be carbon neutral by 2030. But carbon neutral doesn't hack it. Carbon neutral simply means we're not putting any more in there. We're not taking anything away, and we've got to start getting to that level. But until we get to the level where we're not putting any more in, we can't start to get rid of any.
Yeah, but you've got to understand is once you reach carbon negative, or carbon neutral, shall we say, going carbon negative surely is just doing more of the carbon neutral processes.
Yeah.
So it's one of those goals is sort of, you might moan that they're not going to carbon negative, and the answer is, well, technically we're going to carbon neutral. And then subsequently that we're not putting any more in, we're not changing anything, we are now approaching the nets. We can then work on reducing, or even importantly, let the natural flow and cycle of all these things take over, rather than we're having to demonstrate and force everything, or the CO2 out, or the carbon out.
Frightening. I also looked at a beautiful interactive map on this IPCC website, and it looked at what's going to happen if we get a 1 Celsius change and everything went a bit warmer. But then we saw a little bit more, and they started making the poles go really quite sort of bright red, saying there's going to be major changes here. And a 2 degree was frightening. And as for a 4 degree, it's sort of things that you didn't want to think about, because if you've got 4 degrees of global warming, it doesn't mean that everywhere is 4 degrees hotter.
I don't know. I've seen the 4 degrees map, and the answer is the red.
Poles are...
Well, the pole. So it's the scale is it's a heat map. So
Yeah.
obviously, the hotter it is, the darker or the more red there is. So, and basically, if you the picture of the 4 degrees is the Earth is the poles, or at least is black. And the North Pole is essentially black. You know, obviously more red, with the Antarctica and the South Pole being as red as places like the equator.
But that's the temperature change, and we're looking at the poles becoming probably 7 degrees warmer.
Yeah, and if you look, Antarctica, let's say it's minus 40, it becomes minus,
Oh, mass is hard now. 33.
Yeah, minus 33.
Minus 33, yeah.
Right, and you think, that's still chilly. And it is. There's no problem with it.
But if it's minus 2... then we're on +5, and +5 means there is no ice. This is water.
Yes, and this is the critical thing. You see, all that you've now got glacial melt,
and it means that you have to learn to paddle or swim.
Well, or get a bigger boat.
Yeah, which is going to be the big problem, I think. It's I think this report has really frightened some of the countries to think, oh, yeah, we've got time to do this. We've got time to do that. We haven't got any time at all. Oh, dear. I was looking at one of these climate tipping points, and they were saying, yeah, this is going to take place between 2021 and 2030.
What?
And I'm thinking, hang on a minute. We are at 2021 now. You know, we could have reached that point already. And I suppose this is what some of this weather could be giving us a strong hint about, that we actually could have reached some of these things already.
Reach the threshold events. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is a problem. But you say this report is meant to scare people. It's not. It's not meant to scare anybody. All it's doing is presenting the facts. It's presenting, this is the information, this is all the science, this is all the data, all the graphs, anything you need and want as a policymaker, for in governments or for charities, for anybody. This is the science, this is the information, this is the docket we shall be working from to set up the goals, to set how everything's going to work, rather than sort of, one science says we need to do this, another, this is the document, this is the information we will be working off in regards to setting targets, setting, pace of all the things, and sort of what needs to be done, where things are happening. So it's alarming, all the science of what they've done and what they've said, but unfortunately, it's science. It's the truth. It's the umbilical truth. Not umbilical.
All right, while you think of a word, but we have, I think, got this idea at the moment that people thought they had a bit more time.
Yes,
and now they're realizing we haven't got really any more time. Things have got to start yesterday, and until really COP26 comes and the governments sit down and they blame each other and they say, well, yeah, you start this and then we'll do that. It's got to be, we're going to do this now and we're going to achieve this. What are you going to do?
Yeah, and you can see that in all the talks, that you can hear the problems of all the, because they've had lots of talks before the COP just to go through everything. And one of the major things is everybody keeps moaning about, it's this big country should pay more than the small companies because they've contributed more.
Countries, yeah.
I thought you said countries.
I thought you said companies, don't we?
Oh, right. Well,
okay, don't worry.
I mean,
and them, yeah.
And them, exactly. And so it's the idea, but to get them really around, but it's one of those things where instead of just one country doing all the things, it's to say, well, we all need to do it, and it's all these things where we heard earlier about the climate finances that were going through, all the negotiations about how much money was going to be put around, and the answer is not enough.
Yeah, I think that's got worse. Anyway, we've come to the end of our half hour.
Yeah.
And a depressing half hour it's been, really, looking at some of these things. Unless these countries get their finger out and do something now, I suggest that you start investing in a boat.
Well, it's not necessarily a boat. I think it's more of a not a woolly glove. You can get the summer shorts, ready.
Yeah. Unless you're living in England, in which case then
A raincoat.
Raincoat, yes. Right. So thank you for listening to our Going Green podcast, looking at the IPCC report that frightens everyone. And we'll see you next week. We're hoping to talk about plastics, whether they're a good thing or a bad thing. And we'll talk about that one next week. So until then, it's goodbye from me and
Goodbye from me.
yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.